Get started. We are now recording. So welcome everybody to another edition of SciEngage, the first of 2020. We've entered a new decade. Yes, thank you, Sarah. My name is Jeff Hunt. I'm the director of LabX here at the National Academy of Sciences, and I co-organized this with a variety of folks, including Emily Cloyd from the AAAS Center for Public Engagement, and Erica Kimmerling, who is at Aztec, right, Erica? And then a couple other folks. Okay. So welcome everybody, and I'm just going to throw things over to our discussion leaders today, Jeanne Garbarino and Niki Woitowich. So Niki, Jeanne, take it away.
Hi. Thank you everybody for having us. Niki, I don't know if you want to start by introducing yourself.
Absolutely. Hello, everyone. My name is Niki Woitowich, and I'm the Associate Director of the Center for Reproductive Science at Northwestern University. A little snippet about me: I'm a biochemist by training, but have really shifted my career away from the bench towards policy, outreach, and the scientific study of science. So I'm very delighted to be here and to see a lot of we'll not see your faces, but old friends and colleagues, as well as a bunch of new ones here today. And I'm really excited to talk to you about this project that Jeanne and I have been putting together probably about, I would say, for the past 2 years at this point. So we're really excited to get it out the door.
Yeah, and for those who don't know me, my name is Jeanne Garbarino. I'm the director of RockEDU Science Outreach at Rockefeller University, which is a primarily research-focused institution on the Upper East Side in Manhattan. I've been running RockEDU since 2012, and through that time, I've really learned about how really thinking about the dynamics of institutional culture and outreach in those contexts. And also, I'm really interested in the community of science outreach or public engagement, science communication, and we put together the meeting SciOut 18. Which took place in 2018 in October, and we are really trying to learn a lot more about the science outreach, or whatever you are using to describe those types of activities. We are just learning about what's happening across the nation, thinking about how we can help promote people to come together and share knowledge. So there's a lot of things going on, and we think that what we're going to talk about today will feed into some of the efforts that we've been doing from those points. So I'm really excited to talk to you, and thank you again for giving us this platform to share our work. Okay. So I'm just going to jump in. So today we're going to be talking about the research project that Niki and I have put together called the Integration of Science Outreach into the Research Enterprise. And once again, we're thinking about science outreach as a broad term that encompasses the efforts that you might be calling public engagement with science, includes informal science education, science communication, maybe there's some aspects of policy in there. And so we just want to think about it as a very broad term, although I will say that we are coming out with a more formal definition of science outreach next week when we publish a bunch of new stuff. So keep your eyes out for that. But in this context, we are doing this because we think science outreach has been something that's sort of been parallel to science since the advent of modern science. You have Michael Faraday doing, the Christmas lectures. You have Carl Sagan and, people that are trying to really promote engagement with science among non-scientific audiences or non-specialist audiences. And it's only recently that we were finding that science outreach is becoming formalized within the scientific profession. And so more and more we're seeing the emergence of outreach clubs among scientific trainees. We see a more regular incorporation of science outreach strategies into funding proposals, whether you're calling that BI impacts or some other thing. And we see a slow and steady realization among research institutions that science outreach does bring value to their academic setting in ways that go beyond that sort of charitable, altruistic take.
And so while we know that in general science outreach is a good thing and broadly the scientific community supports science outreach, There's actually very little is known about science outreach as it exists within the academic infrastructure, and then also from a scholarly standpoint. And so one of the first things we did is we looked at PubMed and the Web of Science databases for any literature that contained the term science outreach. And I do realize that that's a limitation in and of itself, that not everybody would be using the science outreach term per se. But we found about a little over 100 articles between 1985 and 2018, with the bulk of those really being in 2010 onwards. So that's kind of showing you that this has really been kind of in a scholarly context in more recent years. But then when you go and dive into all of that literature, the majority of that, over half of it, is essentially just program evaluations of their own program or program descriptions. You've got some review articles, but there's really only a very small percentage of articles that are actually scholarly research articles related to science outreach. And so those that were focused on science outreach, they were typically limited to a small sample size or focused solely within one specific scientific discipline. So looking at those in these really small contexts, we can't perhaps translate that information on a broader scale. So when kind of thinking about what we'd like to do, and when we put this proposal together, we really wanted to take a broad multidisciplinary approach to looking at science outreach within academia. And so we do know, we don't want to be exclusive in the sense that science outreach initiatives, projects, programs do exist outside of academia, and perhaps more so in some cases. But for the context of this project, we were limited in the sense that we were going to just focus on one framework with the hope that we could then, kind of do this as provide rationale through this study to expand it beyond. And then also, we do hope in the future to really use this as a way to do a deeper dive into science outreach professionals and what that looks like for individuals who choose this career pathway. And to our knowledge, this is really the first study that will take a scholarly approach to capture that information.
Yeah, so I want to take a little bit of time to talk about our specific goals for the study. So we're really hoping to tackle 3 specific questions around science outreach as it currently exists in the US. And so first and foremost, we're looking to understand what value do members of scientific communities place on science outreach as a practice? And how does this compare to the value placed on this by science outreach professionals? And so as our articulation and broad adoption of best practices around the outreach space are, we're still under construction, and I think we're still working to develop shared language. We're still working to find sort of consensus on what these things actually mean. It's among practitioners of outreach or engagement. It's not clear what the sort of non-practitioner scientists might think about the practice of outreach as well as the role and status of science outreach professionals. Where do I, personally, I'm a practitioner of outreach, I exist in this huge research institution, where, I wanna know also, where do I stand among how people view the work that I do, the work that our team does, stuff like that. So by exploring how our colleagues feel about science outreach, we feel that we can maybe develop some sort of baseline from which we can build new policy or make a targeted set of recommendations to more effectively incorporate science outreach into the research enterprise. And so our second specific goal is to ask, what are the current motivations that propel members of the scientific communities to participate in science outreach initiatives? And so I think this goal really comes from the fact that we need to acknowledge that there is incredible diversity when it comes to considering the motivations for the participation. But if we were to really think about some of the few major reasons, and we push it into a smaller list, we could find patterns based on funding sources, career stage, general diversity, equity, inclusion issues, and also professional development. I think those are pretty broadly encompassing buckets that we can put those sort of motivations into. And then based on our own experiences, and this is something that I don't have really tight data on, but I do believe it's true, and part of the survey is to to help figure out some metrics and some quantifications around this. But it just seems like an overwhelming majority of people who are involved in science outreach activities as sort of the inward stakeholders, so those who are facilitating and creating and thinking about what communities need, they tend to come from minoritized backgrounds and are underrepresented in scientific spaces, so people of color, women. And so when we're thinking about quantifying the outreach community by sex, gender, race, ethnicity, sexual orientation, and motivations, we think that we can get some really deep insights into the science outreach as a field and provide evidence for patterns of participation. And we hope this information relays key ways in which participation can be leveraged for career development, which are very critical for obvious reasons for the large proportion of women and minoritized scientists who are engaging in the science outreach space. And so lastly, our third goal is to ask, what value do members of scientific communities place on science outreach as a profession? So people who are doing this as in professional roles. And in this section of the study, we hope to hear from regular practitioners of the science outreach community to learn about where they work, what are their demographic information, how they are compensated, thinking about salaries, how they perceive themselves in the context of academia. For instance, do they feel that they are, like if they're trained scientists, like if someone came up through a background like mine, where I have a bench background, am I still a scientist? I think I am, but do other people like me also think they are, right? So we want to know how people are thinking about themselves in that context. Are they still scientists as an identity? And then we hope that this will offer insights into where science outreach fits sort of as a professional path and what realistic and representative steps might be for promotion and compensation. So how can we think about this? What are the next steps? What is the career ladder? What can we recommend as a career ladder for someone in these spaces? And as with our points above, we think this has the potential to impact women and minoritized individuals who have transitioned to science outreach as a full-time career.
So we are capturing this information in a quantitative and semi-qualitative approach to really get at the attitudes and opinions people hold towards science outreach within the academic landscape. So some of the inclusion criteria for this study is that you are a graduate student, postdoc, faculty member, or staff who works or studies at a 2 or 4 year college, university, or a research-based institution. And so we plan to recruit hopefully a very broad and diverse pool of individuals to participate in this study. Hopefully, again, using our own personal networks, social media, speaking engagements such as this, and then also with a bit of targeted recruitment, as we'd really like to hear from individuals who hold leadership positions within academia, because I think this is a very important perspective to include, as they are typically the decision makers and can drive institutional policy. So we really would like to ask all of you if you are willing to participate in helping us share this with the scientific community. And if you don't exist within an academic institution, I know we all have colleagues who do, so if you would be willing to share that within your network, we would be incredibly, incredibly grateful. Likewise, if you would be able to facilitate any connections to societies, individuals, or other groups who could potentially assist with distribution, we would greatly appreciate that. I think the results from this study could in turn then really impact the science outreach community as it's growing as a community of professionals, and then help you individually as you either advance in your career or shape policy where you're at. And then lastly, be able to provide visibility to this community. For me, I'm really interested in the scientific study of science, which is now kind of known as meta-research. And as scientists, we have the ability to analyze this data, and sometimes I feel like the outreach community can be marginalized and in the terms of, and this is purely anecdotal, not being seen as equal peers as, say, faculty members. And I think a big part of that is we haven't been speaking the same language in terms of scholarly publications and having visibility in high impact journals. So it's my hope that, you know, starting to really address some of these science outreach and science communication based items through scholarly work can then raise the visibility in arenas where our colleagues are actively engaging. So as I said, the scholarly journals and or other areas. And again, I think this provides us with, and I hate to say it, but street cred. So I think we're very thrilled and excited to share this project with you. We launched it probably 10 minutes before this call started. So we're crossing our fingers there's no bugs. So anywho, I'm gonna toss it back to Jeannie, and I think we're ready to, you know, engage in a really productive dialogue with you, and hope to take some of your questions.
Yeah, I have nothing more to say other than maybe we can just share the link on the chat. Nikki, do you want to do?
Yes.
You might have it pulled up already. Yeah, so Nikki will share our link, and, you know, yeah, so there's some information there. And if I see that there's a comment around written information, whoops, I forgot to. Yeah, we will have a web page that we're almost done putting together that will have sort of like context and a little more information to include in that. So stay tuned for that as well.
We actually have a Google Doc that has some built-in distribution language and images that's pre-made for you to share in whichever way you would like to. This is kind of the snowball sampling method where we kind of get the ball rolling in hopes that it will really kind of grow into something larger. And again, really the success of this survey will depend a lot on the good graces of our friends and colleagues.
Mm-hmm. Yeah. So I think we are happy to take, you know, questions as you have them.
Yeah, and if people want to put their questions in the chat box, we'll sort of answer them as they come through. I'm curious, sort of long term, like, you know, what's the best outcome that you can hope for from this? What do you want to see happen?
I'll start that. I think Jeannie and I have two independent motivations that are a little bit different. So for me, I would love to see this survey taken by a large number of individuals. The stuff that's already been done in the literature have been such small sample sizes. I think they've been it's a limitation to that. And I think if we can get a large scale survey study done with representation from multiple disciplines and multiple individuals, grad students, postdocs, faculty, staff, this data is really powerful and can tell a very important story. And so again, I'm kind of hinging this on the scholarship and then raising the visibility of the importance of science outreach, which like I said, we all agree upon, but I think this is going to tease out some major issues that we know in the field, and kind of just bring more attention to that on a broader level.
Yeah, and I also think it would be interesting to learn about like some of the salary components of it. Like I know that when we were trying to set salary for myself and members of the RockEDU team, our HR department was like, there's no precedence for this. We don't know where your baseline is. We don't know what should we be comparing you to establish what a baseline can be for, you know, a starting salary. So I think getting some of that information together, I think could help put together some vision around that. I also think by engaging, you know, we really hope that this could make it on the radar of some deans and some provosts and some university presidents, where they see that there are organized efforts, supported, you know, funded efforts that are asking these types of questions. Maybe that'll help start putting things on their radars in that way. But ultimately, what I would love to come out of this is to describe where people are and maybe combine it with a set of recommendations for institutions to think about centralization. Like I would love for people to use the information that we can provide, that, you know, based on the knowledge that we collect or based on the answers from the communities that we collect, that that we can, help start shifting the needle to get more and more of these engagement efforts to be supported by hard money. Really think about tackling the issues of succession when it comes to outreach or engagement, and just getting institutions to buy in like, and be accountable for these types of things. Okay, so there's a question around, do you hope that studies like the one you are launching will help to make people understand that science outreach is a career instead of something that people do on a volunteer basis? Yes, absolutely. Yeah, we really want to show that, yeah, you can have career panels and think about, going into biotech, going into education, but there's also outreach, right? And you still get to maintain that connection to, academic science and academic research if you're in an institution, but also promote positions that might be outside at other types of organizations, or maybe you want to think about it as a field that, entrepreneurship, launching your own initiative that is supported, like my friends at the BioBus who do that kind of thing. So yeah, I really think, and by insisting that we're a profession, I think people will start viewing practitioners a little bit and researchers of the field like a little bit differently. Because right now, I have to say my experience is that, people are like, oh, you do things for children. And I'm like, yeah, I do things for children. And they talk to me in ways that like suggest that like I'm a preschool teacher or something. And don't get me wrong, I like value the crap out of preschool teachers. They are amazing, but it's definitely not what I do, and so I want people to understand that I build programs, and I insert scientists, I insert public, I insert, and so I think that people don't really understand what I do, and I would love for that to be changed.
And then I'm going to jump in and say, if you're taking this survey, we have, it's kind of branch logic depending on where you fall, and we have specialized questions for faculty members. And this has come up in a lot of things as how can we, so for those of us who are not, who are not outreach professionals, a lot of faculty engage in science outreach. And so again, do the institutions value this? Do they see it as service, as a part of the tenure and promotion package? And we're asking these questions in order to maybe help provide those folks who do outreach with something to come back to their administration and say, this study said that, well, I'm assuming it's probably going to be a small number, but we could see, who's offering this as part of T&P packages and how that can help promotional advancement instead of this being seen as volunteerism, that it's actually something very valuable to the broader scientific academic communities.
Mm-hmm. Yeah. And I just shared, Chris asked if we can give some language, and I just shared let me know if anybody has problems accessing that.
I'd be interested to hear from other folks on the call sort of how they think that they could use the information that this project is going to generate for themselves and their own institutions, and whether folks who are not necessarily at academic institutions see a way to utilize this. I'm interested sort of community-wide what people are thinking.
Well, I'll just jump in really quick and say we probably should make the survey, we'll plug that into a Google Doc so you have access to the survey questions so that you can see what information is being captured, and hopefully that'll help guide people to be able to know what's being asked so that they can then take it back.
And if I can also add before people start chiming in, we did push out some general ideas, and we crowdsourced a lot of factors. We asked people to contribute, like, what do you want to know about XYZ? How do you, and we really tried to incorporate the feedback of as many people who were willing to give us their ideas and thoughts. So we did incorporate the feedback of members of the communities that we are all existing in the survey questions and the survey design itself.
And we recognize that it's not going to be perfect. There may be disagreements about what's in there. But I think for a first pass, I think this is will be helpful, especially if people want to pursue this or look for other funding mechanisms to pursue scholarly aspects of science outreach. This is good pilot data when this comes out, and then that could be used to springboard other research projects.
Yeah.
Okay, so we have a question. Will the survey tap into the benefits, including monetary, of outreach? It seems like a great first step, but I know most institutions need to see or know what they are getting in return. Perhaps this is more of a next step, since this is more of a self-report step.
Yeah.
That's a good question.
It's a great question. And I don't know, Nikki, I didn't mean to cut you off. Did you want to?
Oh no, you can go ahead.
Okay. So this is actually going to be in context. There is a larger context in which this is some of the work that we've been doing. We're actually putting together lists and recommendations for institutions regarding like the return on investment for investing in the outreach types of offices or careers. And I think this survey will certainly get at the perceptions of, some people, and maybe I can't predict what those perceptions are going to be. I mean, it could be that, deans and provosts and people who handle the purse strings are very much not into having centralized outreach. We don't know what they're going to say, but we are trying to make the case that you can draw philanthropy. You can think about recruitment of scientists. I know anecdotally from my experience, a bunch of the grad students who just started this semester at Rockefeller, about 4 or 5 told me that the reason they chose Rockefeller over several other institutions that they had been accepted to was the robustness of the outreach program. We also are finding faculty seeing the outreach program who are being recruited as mechanisms to help with institutional culture, which had been a bit less than nice to people who are of certain demographics. They're my paycheck, so I'm gonna hold back for a second. They see this as helping to shift the needle and making the culture a bit more inclusive, and because we've really pushed those types of messages through our outreach program. And so we are a value in the recruitment space of both students and faculty. There's a growing number of PIs who are coming to us to help them with their diversity supplements or their broader impacts, or the things that they're incorporating into their funding proposals around engagement. We don't do a lot of NSF, so there aren't a huge amount of BI types of like formal BI stuff, but we are certainly working in some of the grant mechanisms that seem to be more prevalent here, which are NIH based and some other foundational stuff based. And I think we are helping graduate students figure out career paths. We're doing a lot of mentoring in the teaching and education spaces and the SciComm spaces. We're helping PIs think about their talks and their structure of their talks and their audiences. And so we're sort of like becoming these we are becoming like kind of like a core facility. So we're very much aligned to a core facility here, except we do it for free and we don't make any money on it. But yeah, I think we're starting to be able to have tangible items that we can show that this is actually really beneficial for both the institution and the people that exist within that institution. Yeah.
Okay, so we had a question just prior. Oh, we got a couple of things in the chat. So
yeah, I missed all those.
Okay, excited to what value participants place on science outreach. Us too. I think that's one of our biggest things that we're really eager to see how people feel about outreach. Again, in prior research studies, it was, kind of, do you think, it's good to talk about science? And that was kind of the long and the short end of the study. This goes into a bit more depth, asking, do you think science outreach is a valuable tool for XYZ, and really kind of begins to drill down in what exactly people find valuable about science outreach. Okay, let's see. And again, planning research time, so value for people in academia. Yeah, I think this will also be important to, especially if we can get some data on tenure and promotion packages that demonstrating that this is valuable to the institution, to the faculty members, and broadly, the students. Again, as Jeannie mentioned, institutional culture, that's, I think, supporting of that. Okay.
So I also see there's some comment around independent, sorry, I have really bad vision, so I have to like put my face into my screen to read the chat, which is like really tiny. Yeah, so having this kind of data will be helpful in terms of justifying budget requests to funders, making a stronger case about the value of outreach and engagement will be helpful in that. So this is regarding people that are independent practitioners versus institutional practitioners. And we're really looking to promote that institutions who have centralized outreach, with that centralization comes the building up of networks, the building up of community relationships, establishing these sort of like norms. And we're really trying to say that, when you have centralized outreach, you have a higher chance of doing more with other types of community members. And we want institutions to partner with outreach entities that might be just independent in their communities. And I think those types of relationships will definitely help to support independent practitioners and independent organizations that are not necessarily institutionally related or under an umbrella of an institution. And I think lessons learned can be used as a model to for others outside of institutions to also be able to write strong funding proposals, because it's really about sharing knowledge. And we hope that this will help that process.
And Dan shared something about data from their institutions saying that they had, the faculty who work with them, more than half identified additional research funding. So I think that's a fantastic data point to say that this in turn increases research productivity outputs. And so one of the questions we're actually asking faculty are directly, are you doing this just because the NSF is telling you to do it? And I'm not saying that's a bad thing, but kind of drilling down a little bit more into this question of broader impact requirements. I think that information will be telling depending on what comes out of it. Okay, and then here's another call out about the NSF. So yes, I have to say, I must thank our NSF section, which is SciSip, and I am totally blanking on the acronym of that at the moment. Cassidy Sujimoto, who's the current program officer for that division, I got the chance, she is in my other hat of research is looking at sex and gender inclusion in biomedical research. And so I was chatting with her about a separate issue when I mentioned the SciOut meeting that took place in 2018. And, she had mentioned that would have been something that NSF would have liked to have supported. And this was obviously kind of, after the fact that we were putting things together. And so we ended up having a conversation about, would this be something that your division would support? And they were enthusiastic about it. And so we put this in through the NSF Eager mechanism, which is a one-year project, $100,000 budget. And needless to say, as somebody who was a staff member, so I was staff, not faculty, I was, in full disclosure, this was my first NSF grant. So this was just really great that they supported us that we were outreach practitioners. And ironically enough, because I got the NSF funding, I had to switch over to research track faculty. Go figure. But anyways, yeah, NSF SciSip was fantastic. And I can't recommend looking into that enough. I think they see it's worthwhile to have this research, especially as it pertains to broader impacts.
Mm-hmm. And I'm also not a faculty member. I'm considered a staff member. I don't know if that makes any difference, but we both were able to get this grant. My institution didn't require that a specific track or title in order to receive that money, but Northwestern did. So, yeah. So I would love to be a faculty member. I'm not gonna lie, you know, so maybe stuff like this could help people like me who want to do that.
Do we have any other questions, thoughts, comments? So I'll actually take a quick second to plug another aspect of this, and Jeannie touched upon this, is that you know, our anecdotal evidence about underrepresented groups participating in outreach. And from the prior literature, we do know that women are more likely to participate in science outreach compared to men. And so that's one of the aspects I'm really eager to take a look at in this study, will be the breakdown by gender, to see if there are differences in, again, just confirming the data that's already out there, looking at women as practitioners of outreach. And I believe this will be probably the first study to really drill down more and look at gender non-binary, gender non-conforming individuals as well. So we're hoping that this data might be helpful in that case, because, you know, I think this is a twofold issue in that it really relates to gender equity in the workforce. And if women are more likely to be participating in outreach, and we're finding out if we could correlate that with, you know, what kind of compensation they're receiving, you know, I think that's an important thing that we'll have to take a look at.
Yeah, and I'm also interested along those lines in thinking about outreach and TMP packages, because I find that, you know, when I have the majority of people who tend to participate in outreach stuff are people who are not necessarily represented in sciences. And if outreach is not being, if people are taking time to do outreach, that means that that is less time that they've dedicated to their science. And if science is the only thing that they are thinking about for tenure, you know, it's like a wobbly stool kind of situation. They might have service in there, but the service piece is like, you know, a little tiny thing, and so their stool is very wobbly. And so if people like that are, you know, underrepresented folks are putting their effort into the engagement and outreach stuff and less into their science, what happens when they're coming up for tenure, you know? And so if we're not incentivizing it at that level, then it just goes to continue widening the gaps in who is advancing in upper levels of STEM. So I hope to address that somehow there.
Jeannie, you've got a question from Sarah.
Tie into what you're doing as so for my AROS fellowship, I'm establishing a case study library. So this is more along the lines of interviewing people who are doing engagement and outreach in a variety of different contexts and settings, and a variety of different audience groups, and a variety of different goals. And so we think it'll be complementary to this work. We have a lot of projects that are bubbling and stewing and simmering, and we hope that it'll come together to have a really delicious and meal, or what, I don't know, my analogy is losing, but you know, we want it to taste good. So we're trying to combat a lot of these issues from a variety of different perspectives, and this is just one of them. But stay tuned for the case study stuff as well.
Okay, so another question about how we're measuring the value of science outreach for researchers, extrinsic versus intrinsic motivations. And that's a good question. So I'm actually, give me just a moment to get to that section. So we actually ask, on a scale of 1 to 10, how do you personally value science outreach? And that, you know, is obviously going to be dependent on self-report and what people are, you know, their personal motivations. But we're asking a series of questions. So one, science outreach is a tool to do X, Y, Z. So that's looking at what it might be used for. But then we're also asking a series of value questions, looking at, do you think, you know, science outreach is valued by your peers, by your supervisors within your department? And we're kind of taking that approach. And then we've also got a whole series of questions on why people are participating, and also why they're not participating. So there's obviously going to be a good, I would assume, a good number of people who take this survey who aren't participating in any outreach, and then, or if they're participating in outreach at a lower frequency than, say, somebody who is doing this as a career. What are the limitations that they might face? Time, funding, resources, so on and so forth. So I think when we make the survey available shortly after this call, and we'll have all of this information linked out on a specific web page, you'll be able to access that and take a look in greater depth. So I hope that somewhat answers that question.
Yeah, and I'll also just add really quickly that, we are doing the best that we can in the context that we have, and the education that we have, and the experiences that we have. And we realize that's never going to be perfect, but we hope it'll at least bring us to a place that will be forward. How forward depends on how many people take it, and how people perceive it, and things like that. But we're always hoping to iterate and learn. This is by no means a final, going to be a final product. We really want to build off of this, and then see where it takes us.
I know Jeanne and I both come from biochemistry backgrounds, and I think perhaps we should engage some of our colleagues in the social sciences to see if we've got folks who'd be interested in kind of taking this on too. I think this is a very interesting way to approach science outreach, and we'll see what happens. I will admit there are limitations. So this is a self-report study, and that in and of itself, it's not perfect. There are going to be limitations as to who decides to take this study. So people who might not value science outreach to begin with might see the title and say, why bother? So admittedly, this may be skewed towards people that already value science outreach in some way, shape, or form. So we'll see how the data shakes out, but we are moving forward with that in mind.
Mm-hmm.
Okay, there's another question. Oh, sorry.
So I'm going to ask a question, and it sort of relates to what you were just getting at, Niki, but what happens in the worst case scenario? What happens if all the data that you get back says, nah, outreach sucks, it's not worth it, like, don't really care about it?
Well, it means that we have a lot of groundwork to cover, a lot of ground to cover in helping to change perceptions around outreach. Working with scientists, really pushing out and being extremely explicit around the value of it on, the value that is not the charitable value, the altruistic value. It's the value that it has on people's professional lives, their funding lives, getting data like that. I think someone was saying they don't have, you have 61% said they identified additional research funding through working with us. So that's MIT, I think. And it doesn't go quite as far as quantifying the dollar amount, but maybe we can take those types of data and just make them more robust and getting more dollar amounts, because that's the currency of sort of, how people think about science is, money and publication. So maybe we can focus on those types of areas to help bolster the perception of outreach in academic settings.
And I have a really strong interest in science policy. And so if everybody tells us, this sucks, science outreach, is a waste of my time, I think that's where we engage our colleagues at the NSF who do, and have incorporated this as a means of their grant funding, and, work on essentially PR campaigns, as Jeannie mentioned, to promote public engagement with science.
And then asking people to go to bat, I think again, I'm leaning on my experiences at my home institution, but I have never really asked anybody to promote our work, among their colleagues or broader, but I would be happy to try to get audiences with the president, with, other teams that have a lot of decision-making capacity in our institutional setting, or a lot of, maybe they have a lot of just general pull when it comes to their scientific colleagues, asking them to help us come up with the right words, the right delivery systems, the right ways to engage people to help change how people are thinking about these efforts.
And as Jeannie was alluding to, it's not a one button issue. It's not something you could synthesize into one sentence. It really requires thoughtful conversation about what it is to do outreach and why it should be supported. But again, and maybe this is something I should mention as another limitation, we're biased, and we tried very hard to remove bias from our survey. So if you are taking this from the lens of, you're very engaged in science outreach, you may take this survey and think, we played it very neutral. We were very cognizant of that and didn't want to come across as outreach is the best thing to ever happen to the scientific research infrastructure.
Like, click yes if you agree,
Nobody else is jumping in, so I'm just going to keep talking until somebody else. I'm curious what your thoughts are in sort of using this information as well with funders, because obviously, like you're saying, the NSF is very supportive, and the NIH may be supportive, but for example, the NSF budget is like 4 times the NSF, or the NIH budget is 4 times the NSF budget,
right.
And there's no broader impacts requirement for NIH grants. So how do you see that working both, with the federal government, but also with private foundations and people who support? I mean, there are sort of the regular ones that we always sort of think about, Sloan and Kavli and groups like that. How can this information be used to approach not just them, but sort of others and getting them involved in this space?
That's an excellent question. And again, putting on my policy hat, I think that's something that we could kind of look towards as a future direction as to how we, if people are saying this is valuable and, they include it as part of their funding mechanism, they support broader impacts, how can we get this translated over to the NIH in those funding mechanisms? And I know things probably don't move as fast as some of us would like, but if we get some robust data, and I'm not saying this is, the entirety of the piece to move the needle on this, but it can't hurt. And I think that's just something that maybe we as an outreach community should be a little bit better about, is doing our own policy and lobbying towards these changes, but we can't show up without any sort of data to back these statements up, other than like, we think this is super important. Mm-hmm. So hopefully this will be a part of what could, help drive this forward.
I also think that sometimes when you have these broader impact types of things in your funding, and those are, executed, and you get to report about that, it really helps to also elevate those funding agencies in different ways. So I would try to think also about ways that we can promote the benefit to the funding agency to do these things as well. Just PR is one of them, but I'm sure there are other things that I'm not coming up with immediately that we can maybe help provide some material, or at least a starting point to think about what are the benefits of doing this for the funders.
So we have a couple questions. One is from Jen, and this is a very good question, about social desirability bias and how people respond to the value questions. As in, they're thinking they should answer this because this seems like the right answer. So we already did our pre-test, and that did not come up, and we didn't pick up on it. So I think when we go to write that up, we will keep that in mind as a potential limitation.
But I would ultimately like to, maybe as a second step or next round of funding, think about interviews.
So that's actually a question Lily just had about, okay, I'm reading this perhaps a little bit wrong, of industry professionals. That's a really good question about how their audience might have data. That's a really good question, Lily, that we didn't we didn't really think about.
Yeah.
You know, I think it's a little bit beyond the scope of this, but moving forward, I think that's definitely a potential future direction. Another one I would like to see personally come out of this is to be able to find rationale for funding in order to do qualitative interviews with science outreach professionals, and this is going beyond the academia piece, in regards to their experiences transitioning perhaps from a more bench-focused career to an outreach career. And that's going to require money to do that, especially since people's time is valuable. And that's I want to be able to compensate the volunteers for participating in that research. And so that's one of my personal future directions.
And I'll just put in a plug since I know them. Jen and also Peter Lynette, who asked the question earlier, have worked with us here at the National Academies designing survey instruments, and they're great. And they're actually based in Chicago. So I think you should probably
be connected in person very soon. I will fully admit, I have dove into the survey-based research kind of on my own and just learning what I can from reading. So I will admit I am no way officially trained in this capacity. So this is why, we're doing the best that we can with our backgrounds.
Emily, anything you wanted to discuss or anything that we forgot to discuss that we were hoping to?
On this, no, but when we're ready, I can just say a little about the meeting.
Mm-hmm.
So just to turn us really quickly to the AAAS annual meeting, which is coming up next month in Seattle. I wanted to note for those of you that are coming or that are in the Seattle area and can't come to the full meeting, we do have the Communicating Science seminar on Thursday, and that will have in the morning some panel discussions, and then in the afternoon breakout sessions where we can dive a little bit more deeply into a number of topics. So that's basically 9 to 4 on Thursday, and I can just pop a link in here real quickly so that people can see what the sessions are. And then also during the annual meeting, we have a informal networking reception on Saturday evening from 7 to 8:30. So that's just a place for people to come together and chat, and there's no formal agenda aside from get to know other people in this space. And then the last thing I wanted to mention is we are compiling a list of public engagement related sessions during the meeting. So if you happen to be running one or know of ones that you're interested in, you can email me and we will add those to our grid. We'll of course also look through the program ourselves, but if you want to make sure that you get on our list, please feel free to do that, because we want to feature all the great stuff that's happening across the meeting. So I hope to see some of you there. And I just put in a link to the first of the Communicating Science seminar sessions, and you can get to the rest of those through that.
And we had a question, Emily, will that be streamed?
It will not be streamed. We can't do live streaming from the meeting, but we will.
We'll be sharing the video afterwards.
Yes, thank you, Alana.
Cool. All right. Well, I think I'll say that's all. And thank you to Jeannie and Niki for leading this discussion. And we're all, I'm sure, very excited to see what comes out of the survey. So like I said, all this, we'll put all of the links and everything that have been shared in the chat box on the event page for this this webinar, so they're all sort of collected in one place. You know, the language for sending out the survey, and yes, the video will be recorded from this session. We'll also have the survey link, and then Nikki said you'd share out the actual document with the questions from the survey. Cool. And then, yeah, thank you everybody for joining us. Our next SciEngage will be on February 7th, and that will actually feature me, as well as Jen and Peter from Silver Lunettes, and we are going to talk about a research project that we did collectively, looking at the connections millennials and Generation Z have to science, and that's something that we're using to inform our efforts here at LabX, but that we want to share with the rest of the community. We'll also be releasing our website, which has the data and the information from that report publicly during that session. And that will also lead into a breakout session that we will be leading at the AAAS Communicating Science Seminar in one of the afternoon sessions. Come to ours, don't go to anybody else's, it'll be the best one. And so that'll be, again, on Thursday afternoon. And as always, if you want to propose an idea for one of these SciEngage discussions, we're always looking for more volunteers. As you see, it's pretty informal, and we take all comers. Really just trying to have a place to have these discussions frequently. Alana maintains the website and the Trellis discussion pages so that we can continue these conversations beyond just the webinars. They get recorded, they get posted on our YouTube page. So we just want this to be an outlet for the community. Did I forget anything, anyone?
I was just going to jump in and say, on behalf of Jeannie and myself, thank you so much for the opportunity. We appreciate you taking the time to meet with us today and for all the thoughtful questions. And again, we would very much appreciate your help in distributing this survey or taking it. So thank you again, and we look forward to sharing our results with you.
Cool. All right. Well, thank you, everybody. Have a good weekend, and we'll see you next time.
Thank you.